Okay, so thank you both and welcome to the Mission Possible Sofa. This is our hub for ED Live 2018, where we can chat to some of the leading kind of sustainability professionals in their respective sectors, hopefully in a relaxed manner. Hopefully the chair is comfy enough, and just, I suppose, reflects on the event and also reflects on some key kind of sustainability trends in your sector. So it's my pleasure to welcome Jonathan Murray, the Policy and Operations Director at the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, and of course Hugo Spowers, founder of River Simple. So Hugo, I think we start with you. River Simple is a company I know a lot about and I've written about a fair bit, but for some of our viewers, they might quite wonder what it is and how it links to vehicles. So why don't you give it, I suppose, a 30-second pitch of what it is you and your company are trying to achieve?
We're building hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. We're starting from a clean sheet of paper. We believe that the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle technology is both commercially and technically viable here and now, but it needs a step change both in the way in which we build cars and the way in which we provide them to customers.
Okay, brilliant. And you were just in on the kind of sustainability keynote theatre, and how did that discussion go? Was everyone receptive to this idea that hydrogen is a viable transport method?
Well, we didn't really get into so much conversation about the hydrogen as the nature of step changes and the fact that if we're moving into a sustainable industrial society, we've got to toggle our minds from a world in which we manage supply to meet demand to a world in which we manage demand to meet supply. Every banker knows that that's what you've got to do if you're going to live sustainably in financial terms, and the same is true in terms of natural capital. And it's that huge mental shift and the necessary consequent changes in business model that are necessary in order to make efficiency and sustainability profitable. No amount of regulation will make an unsustainable system sustainable. And
Jonathan, I was fortunate enough to catch the end of your session, and in that theme of supply and demand, one of the key conversations was how vehicles are moving on from just a transport purchase to interacting with the grids and the future energy supply, and making sure that the injection of renewables is accounted for, all that kind of stuff. But what was the kind of key takeaway from your session that you really resonated with?
Well, I think the real focus is that we're really becoming at a bridging point where we're moving with plug-in vehicles, zero-emission vehicles, whether they are pure battery electric, range extended, or indeed hydrogen vehicles. We're moving to the point where the market share for them is about 2.5% of new registrations. And that takes us from early adopters into the early stages of mass market. And at this point, we need to start to looking at it as a system. How do those vehicles work with the infrastructure, the local grid, the charging, the transmission, the generation? Because what we want to do here is to develop a sustainable form of transport without the cost, the burden in terms of peak generation demand and in terms of reinforcing the grid. So I think it's really about fleets and private individuals really recognising that this is an opportunity to start moving into these new exciting vehicles. And what we really need to do is look at the business models that allows that to happen. Who makes the investment and bears the cost to make that happen seamlessly?
Okay, and I mean, electric vehicles, especially last year, really kind of accelerated a tremendous amount in the UK. And if you speak to some, like people like Elon Musk will say that hydrogen doesn't really have a place in the future transport system. But you have big kind of companies like Toyota that are hedging their bets of hydrogen. So how do you see hydrogen's role alongside electric vehicles in not just as a transport sector, but as this kind of new service-based thing where it can interact with the grid?
Well, we definitely cannot look at energy and transport separately. We've got to look at the system level. Yeah. And we always talk about how if you optimise the elements of a system, you end up pessimising the whole system. We've got to try and optimise the whole system, and it means looking at the whole lot altogether. We believe that hydrogen and batteries are so different in their characteristics that we need them both. It's not an either or, but for different applications. And essentially, what is often lost in the conversation in the media is the importance of energy efficiency. It's not just clean tailpipe. And energy efficiency depends hugely on weight. And so you can make a very efficient battery electric vehicle for short range. But as you design for longer and longer range, you need a lot of batteries and they're very heavy, so it very quickly becomes inefficient, even if the tailpipe remains clean. So we think we can make a more efficient hydrogen vehicle for any range over about 120 miles, and at 300 or 400 miles it's just chalk and cheese. Our car, for instance, weighs less than the battery does in the Tesla.
Oh wow. Okay, and Jonathan, what's your view on where hydrogen sits in this new kind of vehicle energy mix?
Well, people talk of them as if they're alternatives, but we've got to remember that both hydrogen and batteries are forms of storing energy, and that could be stored on the vehicle, it can be stored in the grid, and a lot of what we're looking at now is how to balance that demand and supply. So I absolutely believe that hydrogen's got a role to play, and absolutely in terms of longer range, hydrogen does have benefits. But I can see that hydrogen will also have benefits in storing energy as part of the local grid.
As hydrogen and electricity are two key energy vectors, are much more powerful than either of them ever can be on their own.
I think that's a really key point to get across. And from a manufacturer's point of view, perhaps it's the cynic in me, but when I think of some of the incumbents, I think that they've kind of embraced this EV transition as a bit of an arms race. It's where the money seems to be heading, so they're doing it perhaps for economic incentives rather than environmental, which perhaps there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But is this an environmental push, or is it because this is a market changing and this is the incumbents reacting to where the money is heading?
Well, I think that the huge growth in the electric vehicle market, we must remember, has not come from the auto industry. It was Tesla who stimulated it, and everybody else is being forced to follow on. We could cynically say that they are investing in that as a short-term PR move because they have to be seen to be doing something, and they have historically invested in battery electric cars because they know they can be no threat to their petrol-engined core products. Having said that, all the major motor manufacturers have got hydrogen vehicle programs, and I mean Toyota has spent over $8 billion on their hydrogen program. So, but they are saying it's a long game and it's very difficult, and that's where we're going to get to eventually. In our view, they are necessarily trying an incremental approach, putting fuel cells into cars and a manufacturing model and a distribution system all optimized around petrol engines, and trying to make the fuel cell behave like a petrol engine, which it really doesn't do very well. So they're having to throw a lot of money at basic science and the engineering, and it's brilliant engineering to produce something like the Toyota Mirai, but they're solving problems entirely of their own creation because they have to pursue this incremental path.
And Jonathan, with this idea that it is a long game, it's a long-term transition for some of the incumbents, what is policy doing to stimulate and accelerate? I've heard arguments before that manufacturers aren't necessarily incentivized much to really throw all their weight behind the electrification or the decarbonisation of the transport sector. So it's diesel engines are inherently linked to air pollution, which is a key topic for government right now, but is more to be done?
Well, I think one of the fundamentals we've got to remember is that the reason fundamentally that we're doing this is because we want to tackle climate change and improve air quality. Those are environmental drivers that we need to deliver on for a world that us and our children can live in. In terms of policy levers that lead that, then it is going to be government that's going to be shaping this market. It's not going to be commercial pressures that lead this transition, and so it does need the right policies to be in place to shape that market. And that's a balance. We've got to look at one of the issues that was addressed today is in terms of the investments that are needed. The time horizon that different players, different stakeholders are having to make these investment decisions over are vastly different. So in terms of mobility, somebody who's producing an app, for your next taxi ride, that will be done in months. In terms of a vehicle, that will be done in years. In terms of the drivetrain, that will be done in decades. And in terms of the energy system, that will be done in, it could be up to 50 years time horizon for investment decisions. So what's very important is we have assurance there in terms of the right balance of policies that will allow people to make those investment decisions with confidence.
And so what does this mean for the consumers? I mean, I pay monthly fees for my car because I couldn't afford the sum up front, and electric vehicles that are coming onto the market, other than perhaps the Nissan Leaf, aren't necessarily affordable for the everyday individual. But as the role of the car becomes more integrated with the energy mix, does it become a change from ownership models to service-based, where the consumer now has a source of revenue coming from these by plugging them into the grid? How do you see that ownership model changing in the future? I'd like to hear from both of you on that one.
Well, I think it's that's a $1 million question, isn't it? Probably more than that. I think one thing is for sure, things are going to change. The role of personal hire purchase is increasing. I know from my own mobile phone, I've never bought a phone. It's always come with the minutes in the contract. The business models, I think, are going to have to change. But one of the fundamental things is, will we be owning these vehicles, or will we be looking at mobility as a service, which I think is a very different proposition.
I think that we must draw a clear distinction between selling service and leasing. We as a company hope never to sell a car, and I believe that actually the biggest change we need to see isn't a technical one, it's a change in business model. Unfortunately, if you sell cars, there's no driver to improve efficiency, because it does cost more to make a more efficient car. But customers always discount future savings to zero. So effectively it just reduces margins. So why is anybody going to build a more efficient car? The only thing then left is regulation, and because it's counter to profit motives, the industry can only lobby against them, as we've seen recently. So I think the biggest change we need to see is we need to make efficiency profitable, and that means selling a service where the company that makes the car retains it on its balance sheet and internalises all operating costs. So instead of being rewarded for obsolescence, it's rewarded for longevity, and it's directly rewarded for efficiency because the company pays for the fuel throughout the life of the car. And that fundamentally changes the drivers. And if you make efficiency profitable rather than unprofitable, you will see much more rapid change in the efficiency of vehicles. And the great thing about doing that is if you have the flexibility to do that, it's a source of competitive advantage. So you don't have to wait for a government mandate and a level playing field to do it.
Sounds like a contract I would certainly be on board with. And I suppose just finally, the theme of EDI Live this year is of course Mission Possible, and we've come up with I suppose a future and what it takes to get there to make low carbon transport the norm. I mean, we've got a pledge wall off to my left behind me, and I'm not going to ask you to make a pledge unless you really want to. It would be nice. But I suppose in the theme of Mission Possible, for your organisation, what are you focusing on in the midterm? What is your kind of mission that you would like to achieve in the near future?
Well, we're running a trial of 20 of our cars for 12 months starting in September in Monmouthshire with a filling station in Abergavenny, and we are aiming to be in production, volume production, with a new plant by late 2020.
And Johnny?
Well, we're waiting for the announcement from the government on the road to zero, which I think is going to be the green light for a number of policy initiatives, and we're looking really to help engage with those and provide some certainty in policy for stakeholders looking to invest.
Okay, brilliant. And I realise that the tannoy has been going on and we've got to move, so thank you both very much for your time.